Yeah, okay. Now, if you have a situation where your client likes to invest in a trustee sale, there is a special notice for trustee sale property or foreclosure property that you use. Say, for example, your client hire you to represent him to bid at a trustee sale, and he's successful. And after the trustee sale, your tenant wants the property vacant, but there is a tenant living on the property. So what notice do you need to serve on the tenant? This is the notice. Notice of termination of tenancy within 1 year after foreclosure, giving tenant at least 90 days to vacate. So the tenant has possibly a 90-day period to vacate in the event of a foreclosure situation. Okay, if the tenancy, say for example, you buy the property today, you want the tenant out as soon as possible, this is the form you want to use. Okay, now this is a pretty new form. I think it must be very recent. Oh, actually 2012, this form is available. You have all the language in here, so it's actually a good form because I think it meets all the legal requirements for valid notice. This law is good to December 31st, 2019. Okay, and you have all the language in there. All you got to do is to fill in the blanks. Okay, so that's the form in the trustee sale situation. So we cover that. And let's see what else. Oh, okay, here's another one. This one is a little different. This has to do with notice to perform, covenant, cure, or quit. Now, this form is different from the notice to quit. Notice to quit deals with non-curable breach. Notice to perform, covenant, cure, or quit deals with curable breach. So let's go ahead and open this one. Notice to perform, covenant, cure, or quit. Okay. This one, you're supposed to give the tenant a second chance. Now, what would be your example of curable breach? Now, if the lease requires that the tenant provides renter's insurance and the tenant fails to obtain renter's insurance, that is a curable breach. So you will serve this notice on the tenant, and you tell the tenant exactly what you want the tenant to provide. Obtain renter's insurance and provide proof of insurance. That's just an example. There are many situations where the breach is considered to be curable. For example, if the tenant is supposed to maintain the landscaping, tenant fails to maintain the landscaping, you can serve a notice to perform covenant on the tenant. Okay, because that is a curable breach. Now, sometimes a curable breach has nothing to do with the rent. If the curable breach has nothing to do with the rent, you do not use a notice to pay rent or quit. You use this notice. For example, if the tenant is supposed to pay for the utility bills and the tenant fails to do that, you can go ahead and use this particular form. And again, don't forget to have the name of the recipient, the phone number of the recipient, and the address where you expect the payment to be made, the hours, and the days. Okay, and then you fill out this information and then the proof of service. Oh, sorry about that. I didn't mean to exit. So we're done with that. Okay, here's another one. Notice of right to inspection prior to termination. This is probably the one that you want to give to the tenant in the beginning, before the tenant moves. I think preferably before the tenant even take possession, you want to give the tenant this notice. It's called the notice of right to inspection prior to termination of tenancy. There's nothing wrong with serving this one during the tenancy, but it's actually preferred that you give it to the tenant at the commencement of the tenancy. That way they know that they have this right, okay? Now there's some standard language in here. You fill this out at the top. And then number 3, you say to the tenant, the inspection can be conducted no earlier than 2 weeks prior to termination. And then here you tell the tenant when the lease is scheduled to terminate. Now, you will know this if you sign like a 1-year lease or 2-year lease. You know exactly what day the lease is going to terminate. So why don't you go ahead and prepare this notice and give it to the tenant along with the lease. That way, you get all these paperwork all taken care of. You don't have to worry about forgetting it, okay? You want to give it to them at the time you sign the lease agreement. And then you can say to the tenant what day, what time, you prefer to conduct the inspection. Now, this is the inspection that the tenant has the right to insist the landlord performs, okay? Now, tenant can call up the landlord before the termination of the lease to schedule the final walkthrough. And during the final walkthrough, you can each agree on or disagree on the repair items. It's a good practice because before the tenant move out, you go over with the tenant. What do you think is tenant's responsibility, and what do you think is landlord's responsibility? You can each sign your name on the same report. On the report, you'll say what you agree and what you don't agree. Now, whatever you don't agree is something that must be settled or something that has to be decided by the judge, okay? But this is the notice you want to give them upon commencement of the tenancy. Now, here is where you fill out this information. Now, tenant number 8 is actually to be completed by the tenant. Tenant will tell you, now if the tenant wants an inspection, he'll check the box here, okay? And then it says if the date and time is specified in paragraph 4, please schedule the inspection for that date and time. So probably he might check here, or he could check here, okay? And he leave his phone number here for you to schedule an inspection if there is no date specified in paragraph 4. Okay, now what does paragraph 4 say? Paragraph 4 say, landlord prefers to conduct inspection on this day. So usually, let's say, you schedule inspection like a couple of days before the final day of the lease. You go ahead and put date here and put the hours here, but if you leave it blank, then you just communicate in the future by phone, okay? So the tenant would have to check this. And sometimes the tenant don't care about this. Of course, the tenant has the right not to do any inspection. You cannot ask the tenant to do a final walkthrough with the tenant if he doesn't want one, because that is the tenant's right. Final walkthrough is actually the tenant's right, not the landlord's right, okay? So the tenant can certainly check this box and then release and hold harmless the landlord and brokers. So, it's up to the tenant whether they want to check number 8 or number 9. And then the tenant just print their name and date it, okay? And I think the tenant is signing here, so you got to set up e-sign, okay? No point to just print name and not, not sign this document. I think it has to be completed. Can we leave that till the end? Still not. Okay. Forwarding address. Now, usually, if you're a property manager, you want to have this form filled out in the beginning when the tenant is very friendly to you. You want to, whatever forms you want a tenant to sign, the best time to have them sign them is when they are friendly, which is in the beginning or at the commencement of the tenancy. That is the best time for them to make them sign forms, okay? And then the tenant will fill out the forwarding address. Now, why is it important for the tenant to fill out the forwarding address? You want the tenant to fill out the forwarding address because you need to know where to send them the refund for the security deposit. Plus, there may be other reasons why you want a forwarding address. So this is a good time to get the forwarding address from them. But sometimes the tenant don't know what their forwarding address is, especially when they're about to move into your place. They don't know where they're going to be in the future, right? So they may have to leave this blank. So the disadvantage of giving this form too soon is that you can't use it to get the tenant's forwarding address. So sometimes you may not have that information. But I know Gene Riley and Darby Riley like to use this, to give this form to the tenant early to get it out of the way. That way you don't have to worry about chasing after the tenant for their signature. Okay. All right, that's done. So that's finished. So that pretty much covers all the statutory notices that we wanted to cover today.